Hello, it's Red Chair Reading. I'm Hobie Wan. We are reading The Ghost at Skeleton Rock by Franklin W. Dixon, a Hardy Boys book. Actually, Hardy Boys number 37, chapter 2. It's short and sweet, only about 3 pages long. The Suspicious Trailer. Their heads covered, Frank and Joe were hurled to the ground. Resistance was futile. Quickly their hands and feet were bound. Then they were dragged out of the tent and into some bushes. Footsteps indicated their attackers had left. Joe! Joe, can you hear me? Frank shouted. The hood muffled his voice, but he was able to make out Joe's response. Right here, Frank. From a short distance away came confused sounds as if the tent were being quickly taken down and stowed in the trailer. Soon the engine of a car roared to life, and the vehicle went rumbling off down the highway. Meanwhile, the boys twisted and turned in a frantic effort to loosen their bonds. This was not the only time they had found themselves in a predicament like this one. Ever since their first big case, the Tower treasure, the boys had often been in tight spots. But always their quick, cool thinking had enabled them to outwit their adversaries. In their most recent mystery, they had survived underwater spear gun attacks and other dangers to learn the secret of Pirates Hill. By the time Frank got his hands free, his wrists were rubbed nearly raw. He jerked the black hood off his head and saw Joe still straining to free himself. Here, I'll do it, Frank offered. Quickly he removed his brother's hood. In a few moments, both were free and on their feet. Joe peered at the tire tracks of the vanished car and trailer. They made a neat getaway, he said bitterly. Which means the great Hugo must have been the Hugo we want, Frank said grimly. Then what are we waiting for? Joe sprinted toward the convertible. Let's go after him. Before leaving, Frank insisted that they examine the tire treads of both the vanished car and the trailer. Then the boys ran to their convertible. Frank gunned the engine, and they both took off in a spurt of sand and gravel. Luckily, Route 10 ran north for almost 12 miles before intersecting another major highway. En route, there were several dirt road turnoffs. Frank and Joe stopped at each one and got out to inspect all tire marks on them, but they found no sign of the vehicles belonging to Hugo and Abdul. Probably they're heading out of the county, Joe remarked. Wait a minute. Let's try this trailer court up ahead, Frank suggested, as it was located less than half a mile from the highway intersection. He braked the car and swung over onto the shoulder of the road. Again the boys climbed out. It's 100 to 1 shot, Frank admitted, but Hugo might have turned in there to throw us off the trail. He'll have a tough time hiding that orange trailer, Joe said. Say, look, he broke off with a gasp and rubbed Frank's arm. Over there. Frank turned to face the direction in which his brother was staring. An orange trailer. Though partly hidden from view by other vehicles, the trailer looked like the one used by Hugo and Abdul. The boys approached it casually, trying not to attract any attention. Their hopes, however, was soon dashed. Frilly laced curtains showed in the windows of the trailer. In front of it, a fat, bald-headed man in Bermuda shorts lounged in a deck chair. A moment later, a woman came out carrying a baby. Frank smiled to hide his disappointment. Okay, all right. So our long shot didn't pay off. Now what? Frank considered. Once Hugo hits the crossroad, there's no telling which way he'll head. Guess we better notify the police. Across the highway from the trailer court, there was a roadside store with a gasoline pump. The boys hurried over and put through a call to Chief Colleague on the store's payphone. I'll send out a radio alert, the officer promised, after hearing Frank's story. Maybe the highway patrol can pick those men up before they cross the state line. Thanks, Chief. We'll keep in touch, said Frank. Somewhat dejectedly, the boys plodded back to their convertible. What a wild goose chase, Frank groaned. On the way back to Bayport, Joe brightened. Suddenly, as a thought struck him, maybe we could spot Hugo's trailer from the air. That bright orange trailer ought to stand out on any road. Frank agreed. We can ask Jack Wayne to take us up, he said. When they reached home, Frank parked the convertible in the driveway, and the boys hurried into the house. Before they were halfway through the kitchen, the telephone rang. Maybe it's Chief Colleague with some news, Joe exclaimed. He reached the hall first and scooped up the phone. Hello? This is Chet, Joe, came a breathless voice over the wire. Something's up. I need help right away, over at my place. Chet Morton, a chubby pal of the Hardys, attended Bayport High with them. Good-natured and fond of eating, he was usually slow-moving and easy-going, but now his voice throbbed with fearful urgency. Chet, what's this all about? Joe demanded. I can't explain over the phone, but get here fast, his friend pleaded. This is important. Okay, we'll be there pronto. What's wrong? Frank asked as Joe hung up. Search me. Chet seems to be all worked up. Sounds as if he's in real trouble. He wants us to come over to the farm on the double. All right. But first, let me call Jack Wayne. Snatching up the phone, Frank dialed Jack's cubbyhole office at the airport. When the pilot answered, Frank gave him a quick account of their adventures with Hugo and Abdul. Jack was thunderstruck to learn that the brothers were already on the trail of Hugo Purple Turban. Joe and I figure, Frank went on, that the quickest way to spot the trailers from the air. Could you go up and reconnoiter a bit? Sure, Jack replied. Frank described the hardtop coupe and orange trailer, and then Joe hung up and hurried out to the car with Joe. 20 minutes later, they reached the Morton farmhouse on the outskirts of Bayport. The boys ran up to the front door and rang the doorbell. Two pretty girls answered the door. One was Chet's dark-haired sister, Eola. The other, a blonde with sparkling brown eyes, was her chum, Callie Shaw. The two girls often double-dated Frank and Joe. Well, imagine meeting you two here, said Iola, in pleased surprise. You're just in time, Callie said. She held up a puppet dressed like Little Red Riding Hood. We were just practicing for a puppet show we're going to give at the hospital bazaar. You two can help us. Where's Chet? Joe interrupted. Why, out in the barn, said Eola. But come on, Frank. Without waiting to explain, Frank and Joe rushed outside and headed around the side of the barn to the rear. Voices became more audible at every step. Suddenly, both boys pulled up short and stared at each other in amazement. Did you hear somebody mention the name Hugo? Joe whispered breathlessly. Freezing in their tracks, the Hardys listened intently. We'll get the Hardys and get 'em good, Hugo, said a rough voice. Yeah, came the chuckling reply. We'll ambush them tonight. Ooh, that was the end of chapter 2. Thank you for sticking with me.